The government has signalled that moving to a digital economy will be essential for our economic recovery from COVID-19. And you may recall just a couple of weeks ago, the Treasurer announcing pre-budget that they're investing $1.2 billion over, I think it's 6 years all up, a little bit more than the forward estimates. Of that, about $500 million is going towards fixing My Health Record and MyGov, but it's good to see, as anyone who's probably used those sites know, they do need a bit of a tweak, but it is a very important part of our economy, and it's been part of our conversation today. So our next panel is going to explore the critical enablers of the digital economy, including digital ID and CDR. And we've got to do that, Scott Farrell from King, Wood and Mallesons, Jill Berry from Adatree, and Amanda Robinson from the Australian Red Cross. Our moderator for this session is Stuart Stoyan from MoneyPlace. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for our fabulous panel.
Bring it in. All right. Now, we've done this by design, which is that we're actually in order. If you don't know who we are, that is Scott, that is Jill, that is Amanda, I am Stuart. Welcome to Digital Economy. So to kick it off, I guess the first sort of question really is, what is needed for a digital economy? And then how do we build it? So keen just to get some initial thoughts from the panel, and then we're going to freestyle from there. So happy to start with maybe you, Scott, given that you are the architect of everything that's CDR related. Just out of interest, has everybody read Scott's reports? Hands up if you read the report. Hand up if you actually read the entire report. Hand up if you couldn't get past page 3, which is that gorgeous blue steel photo of Scott that seems to be circulating around. Anyway, back to Scott.
Thanks, Stuart. I'm glad that you didn't let me down by sledging me in the very first comment.
And that's all from Scott. Moving on to Jill.
It was better than I was going to say. I think there's two things. It's inclusion and connection. And the reason I say that is because they rippled through the last report. It was including more real people by getting them to do more stuff, and including businesses by expanding the actual breadth through our economy. The connection is both connection with the other parts of our digital economy, which we'll be discussing today, which is fundamental because no system can be an island in a digital economy. And lastly, and we do forget about this when we have a pandemic raging, is connection internationally, because data knows no borders, even though laws do. So I think those two aspects of inclusion, and of course inclusion also means including people from all sections of society. Those two aspects of inclusion and connection are things which are recurring themes in my work in our digital economy.
And Jill?
I think that scalability and being really framework and principles-based is incredibly important for it. Obviously, I'm incredibly passionate about the CDR and been thinking about all the different use cases. It's like so many amazing ones we haven't even thought of yet at all. So how can we have a framework where it works for lending, where it works for social outcomes, and we actually don't have to customize like our technology very much across the economy. I think that that's when you can really bring some use cases to life much quicker once you just have one framework. And well, I mean the same way that they just removed the AMO gateway for energy. Just having something standardized that so many different companies, technology providers can really participate in, I think it's really important.
Fantastic. And Amanda, you've got a unique perspective here, right? Because I don't think many people in the FinTech Australia community would expect somebody from the Australian Red Cross to be up on stage talking about digital economy.
That's right, Stuart, and incredibly grateful and pleased to be invited, because you're absolutely right. We don't often get invited into these conversations, so fantastic to be here. Building on what Scott said, inclusion is essential, and beyond that, equity. Having an equitable playing field where everybody gets to participate in civic, social and economic life is absolutely paramount. And the way we do that is to build platforms that have users at the core and in control, ensuring interoperability, and that people have the freedom to choose. And so once we have that as a sort of fundamental and the principles, as Jill said, then we've got a great platform from which to build a very inclusive and equitable digital economy.
So how do we build that? How do we allow for it to be inclusive? And what is the right point? Does it need to be from today? Should it be from version 2.0? At what point do we need to start thinking about inclusion?
It's actually, right now. In fact, my team over the other side of town in a summit at the moment where we're talking about humanity first and building technologies with a humanity first lens. And one of the things that we're talking about is how do we invite community in? How do we ensure that we're engaging with community in the right way to ensure that we're building technologies from the very outset that understand everybody's different perspectives, unique positions, and so that we build that technologies right and that we're not having to retrofit technologies for specific cohorts of people, marginalised, vulnerable people, people experiencing emergencies and disasters, that actually we build it from the very outset in a way that engages all people and can be used in all circumstances.
And then to Jill and or Scott, how do we do that from an interoperability perspective with global considerations, right? Because what we're seeing is we're seeing different CDR equivalent regimes building up in different jurisdictions. How important is interoperability there, and what do we do to actually achieve that?
I think that we're seeing that across other regulator-driven countries that are looking at the Australian consumer data right, so economy-wide sharing. I think it's about taking lessons from other countries, using common standards, not customizing it. So other countries like Brazil, New Zealand, Canada can kind of like copy and paste straight from Australia. We're talking to Brazilian banks right now who are just like, listen, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Let's just get on with it. And they're really focusing on the unbanked population over there. So they're already just taking all the hard work that Scott and DSB and so many other people have really done, and they can just get straight onto it. And I love that they're not trying to make their own version. They're just like, listen, this works. Australia's been testing it, and let's just focus on the actual outcomes and just trying to just like create something brand new just for the sake of it.
And Scott, do you see that as a good thing that other countries are following Australia's lead, or is that just a missed fee opportunity for you to be able to consult around the world with the same?
Yes to both. No, I think it does make sense. Everything that can really be scalable for for technology and really adoption. Ultimately, the end users who have the problem solved through real-time data sharing, they're the ones that win. So, but yeah, is it great for the Adatree open banking platform? Yes.
And Scott, I mean, a serious question on that. Like, how much consideration did you put to global standards and interoperability?
A lot.
Oh.
Sorry, was that to me, mate?
Yeah, to Scott.
I couldn't tell because you weren't sledging me, so I think that was me.
And that was from Scott again, moving back to
Quite a lot. So in both, and in fact, in all three inquiries, although one hasn't, I'm still finishing one, I spent a lot of time working with other countries. In the first CDR inquiry, the open banking inquiry, I was mesmerised by the fact that there wasn't actually thinking on this scale in the other countries I was working with. In the second one, I was mesmerised that I was getting the points from other countries. And in that time period, I worked with those other countries as well. This is a huge opportunity for Australian businesses and for Australian customers. It works both ways. There is an issue. We don't want to create something that is just Australianised, and we have to keep referring to often international analogies rather than just exactly what we are doing. But what I've learnt in work I've done in other areas, such as distributed ledger technology and smart contracts, is the best thing to do is to be involved in the creation of the standards. Of course, they will change and develop, but that way it works for your culture. And data is culture. You might think Australia doesn't have much of a culture. We certainly do. And it is shown through the way that we relate to data. So in relation to this journey that we're on, it's really important for you as Australian consumers and you as Australian business owners to ensure that we are part of this rule-making process. And I mean like global rule-making process. We won't get to do everything we want, but it will mean that it will make sense to you. And if it makes sense to you, it makes sense to your customers, your family, and our society. So I think it's enormous opportunity. Obviously, we have to keep that Australian aspect of not getting too big for our boots on this, but when we've got countries who are our friends who are asking for help, I think we should be helping.
And so we've now got CDR launched for banking. We've got energy coming. When do we start to get to the good stuff? And maybe this is a great sort of segue into Adatree and what you guys are about, right? Because just doing the same things that we're doing previously, but digitally, great. But where's the new stuff? Where's the good stuff? How's this going to change my life?
That's really interesting. Well, I'm glad that we started with banking. What I get really excited about is like the end outcome is like the good stuff would be how do you start to save money with very little effort? How do you get rid of your life admin? Like that, it's how can you just do what you want to do and then just like things just happen in the background? And your problems are just solved much easier. We're very early in the CDR stages, but I think that with action initiation, everyone really focuses on payments, which will be great to facilitate that through a consistent consent flow that you have control over. But it's also like, how can you update your customer information? How can you have seamless transfer of not only data, but also digital identity through that type of a framework? So if you actually want to open an account or a switch, how can you meet your AML KYC regulations while relying on someone else's outcome, someone else's identification analysis as well. So I think that once like payments, ID, opening, closing accounts, and switching is really facilitated, like that's the really good stuff. But I mean, also thinking about non-financial use cases. I know that Amanda's very enthusiastic about those, but just looking at, for me, the good stuff is social outcome focused use cases. That's how Australia will really change for the better. Sorry, Stu, but Australia won't be better off just because they have faster loans. They'll be better off because they actually solve problems for people who are vulnerable and need the help the most.
No, that's entirely true. I think, Amanda, there's a good jump to you in terms of some of the way that you guys are thinking about this, right? Because we'll come back to financial services in a second, but just what does this mean for you? What does this mean for the Red Cross? How does that actually then apply?
So putting people at the core and in control of technologies is pretty fundamental to what we're doing. And this is a step towards that. So Jill talked about some of the social use cases, and a very real one that we've had, well, over the last 12 months, we've had plenty to point to, but certainly we all remember the bushfires of 2020. And as an organisation who's charged with getting payments or aid out to individuals quickly, we can be challenged by the different platforms and systems that different organisations use, particularly when helping people who have literally had everything they own burned down. They don't have access to their identity anymore. And so how do we quickly prove who they are and give them access to services without having to re-traumatise them by putting them through the same process time and time again, whether it's engaging with the Red Cross or Salvation Army or a bank, that we actually have a way of seamlessly transitioning them through all of the different organisations and platforms that they need to engage with. And so that's a real example of how people who are experiencing trauma can be assisted through having an open consumer data platform. And so that's an example of sort of what we could be doing right now. But I think ultimately having people in control of their own data and choosing who they share that with is going to be so fundamental to everyone engaging fully in society.
But underlying all this then, I think it's the same thematic as Jill's talking about. This is about eliminating the friction. This is about getting rid of the boring stuff, getting rid of the hard stuff, getting rid of the stuff that just is too difficult, and just making it easy so people get on with being enjoying life.
Exactly right. And again, for most of us, we can navigate those systems and platforms, but for people who are experiencing vulnerability or marginalisation or exclusion, again, that can be really hard. So one of the things that we're looking at is identity equity. So how do we create identity for people who don't have legal forms of identity or are struggling to prove who they are in the community? So how do we attest to their identity in different ways to allow them to engage in society more fully and to open up opportunities that they might otherwise be excluded from?
And if you then move forward with CDR as it becomes economy-wide, what does that start to look like, I guess, Jill, in terms of the things that you're thinking about, and also Scott, what you've sort of considered as the broader sort of overarching, this is an economy-wide consumer data right? This is not open banking.
This, the economy-wide nature of our CDR is the most striking aspect in the work I do with other countries. It's the thing that, which, to be fair, it's not really rocket science in a way. I mean, implementing it is, but the concept that a real person doesn't have banking data or energy data or telco data, they just got stuff about them, and why can't they share it, why can't they be in control of it, that's not rocket science, but it's quite a different concept to the way that certainly lawyers and policymakers have thought about data for many years, where it's about controlling it and locking it up rather than allowing people to use it. What does it mean? It is, in my view, one of the two critical elements because I want to be able to share the data from a provider in one part of my life with a provider in another part of my life that doesn't have an agenda in trying to sell me something. But I can't understand the data. I'm not that clever. Many of you are that clever. But I will want to trust someone who I already trust with another part of my life. Yes, they will use that possibly to provide me with other choices, other convenience, but being able to share economy-wide gives me confidence. And that is a fundamental thing that goes with choice, is a question of, am I confident that this works well? The other part of that is when it goes economy-wide, that thing I referred to as a digital power of attorney, which is the action initiation. That is incredibly powerful because, exactly as you said, Stuart, it becomes an issue of there are some dull things in my life. I already use mechanisms for other people to do dull things for me. Why is there no way for other people to do dull things for me digitally? Many people who don't come to events like this, they struggle with the interfacing with the digital world. Why shouldn't they be able to trust people to do that for them? Particularly if, for example, we trust so many entities with important parts of our lives when we buy our food, when we go to the doctors, all these sorts of things. Some of those entities might be able to help us if we have an economy-wide CDR.
And how are you thinking about that, Jill? Because that sort of gets into what Adatree is about as well.
I think we definitely like to think about outside banking data and what does this really mean economy-wide. I mean, it's like, I like to think of like beyond energy, beyond telco, and I'm actually excited about insurance and superannuation.
Hands up if you're excited about insurance, everybody. All righty, great. There we go.
Oh my God, I love the CDR reports, and I just said I love.
Hey, all right, you brought it up. That's my segue. Okay, what's your favourite recommendation out of the first report, Jill?
I mean, who doesn't have a favourite of the 100, really? Scott, stop it.
The recommendations are like Scott's kids. No. He loves them all equally.
Yeah, they're all his kids. My favourite recommendation is 7.9. If you don't know it off the top of your head, it's actually encouraging innovation through CDR to support vulnerable people. Everyone, I assume that so many people here are involved in, if they're looking at CDR, really you have to have a business case that really supports it. It's regulated, it's not free, there are costs associated with it, and yeah, it really has to stack up for your business. But so many of these use cases that that Amanda was talking about, they could really bring great change to so many people, and it doesn't have the business case that really stacks up, unfortunately. So that is actually about establishing a government grant program to encourage like non-for-profits, charities, or just really all types of companies that are interested in non-commercial but CDR-driven outcomes to actually support that builds in the running of it, which I'm actually super excited about those ones.
No, well played. I think the story, and I assume it's okay to share it here, but I mean the inspiration for your business was the actual report. Is that fair to say, or is that a mischaracterization?
That's totally true. Once I said it in the Data Standards Advisory Committee, and now it's stuck, that I called Scott's original review into open banking my personal Harry Potter. He just released 2.0, which is CDR in the Chamber of Secrets.
Now that's going to stick, Jill. Now that you've said that in public, that's going to stick.
No, but I was actually so excited about the potential, not necessarily the technology, but it's like, here's something that's going to be economy-wide. It's actually so hard to do, but the barriers are high, but the benefits are even better. So it actually inspired me to quit my job and face a whole lot of regulatory uncertainty and create Adatree. But yeah, I love it.
And so that sort of moves with the last few minutes of the session to then say, well, the bit here for the digital economy that's then needed is digital ID. And so how is it that we then accelerate that, ramp that up, and when do we need to ramp that up?
Who was that? You got
anybody.
I actually think Amanda's probably got a really good answer in this. The one thing I would mention in relation to digital identification is if it's just like the CDR and it's just like the red and yellow flags in a way, CDR will result in us identifying ourselves digitally. As it rolls out across the economy, it will be used more and more. By not making a decision in relation to digital identification, we are clearly making a decision, because the mechanism that we use to identify ourselves economy-wide, to share our data, and to authorize people to do things on our behalf will clearly be one of the strongest methods that we use to identify ourselves. Accordingly, we spent a fair bit in the report saying, maybe we want something stronger for an economy-wide, a CDR, than just bank login details with a one-time password, for example. So I think it is essential that we make a conscious decision about the way that Australians can choose to identify themselves digitally.
So does it need to be an Australian standard or a global standard?
That's a trick question, right? Because you know my answer to anything in relation to standards is it needs to be interoperable with international standards.
So aren't we just describing my Facebook ID?
I would love to think of something to sledge you with on that right now. Not in my view. Not in my view.
But as a serious question, though, why not? Because what we're seeing is that we've got Facebook IDs, we've got Apple IDs, we've got whatever the platforms are that we're engaging with. If you think about this from a global perspective from China, you think about WeChat and stack around that. Why is it that we need a government ID as opposed to a commercial ID?
I never said government.
Ooh.
I never said government. And I actually want Amanda to talk about this, right?
Yeah.
So just to be clear,
if you stop talking, we'll move on.
Just to be clear, what the report said is there should be the potential for identification service providers to be able to compete and contest the marketplace based on safe international standards. I have no problem with the public sector as well as the private sector being involved. It's got to be safe, it's got to be usable, it's got to be about the customers, give them choice, convenience and confidence. But actually, Amanda, what do you think?
Well, I love everything that you're saying, Scott, and I think it absolutely is about interoperability and standards. It's about a market-driven approach, and it's about individuals deciding what they want and what's right for them. And I think beyond that, it's about creating pathways. So for this to be equitable and inclusive, we need to create pathways for people to engage. So that whether that's someone exiting the justice system, having their parole officer provide a reference, and that's enough for them to then get a credential that enables them to access a service. Whether it's someone newly arrived to Australia having their caseworker at Red Cross, again attesting to their reputation and trustworthiness. If that's enough to get them started, then that's a way for us to start building a more equitable and fair digital economy for everyone.
And Jill? You said you'd read up on this.
I know. I feel like digital identity definitely isn't my strength, but I guess just going back to the report and recommendations, like why can't you use your Facebook OAuth? Ultimately, it's just being able to rely on something and also meet your regulatory obligations for identifying someone. How do you authenticate them and really know that it's someone? Facebook isn't reliable enough for it. I think it's one aspect of it, but especially if you're going to try to remove friction, increase access so you can be identified from one provider to another, we'd still have to maintain those, the 100-point ID check equivalent for it. So, I don't know. Sorry, no Facebook for me.
No, that's perfectly fine. So, closing thoughts. 15, 20, 25 seconds. We can start with you, Amanda. Just a final thing to bring us home.
So I guess just to go back to my comments at the start, that it's so exciting to be invited into a FinTech conference, that everybody here has the opportunity to think very deeply about how we engage the whole of community in all of the work that you're doing. And so yeah, an invitation to begin that conversation and to think about the whole of community when you're designing products and services.
Jill?
I think that most companies here are tech companies in the room. I think that we have an obligation to not only just look at a business case, but we have an obligation to use our tech for good, to use CDR for good. And so challenge of how can you offer your products and services, but also help people along the way and bring that into your business case. I think that's our obligation is tech companies to be super inclusive.
Bring us home, Scott.
Two things. One, many people in this room have contributed to a number of inquiries that I have been privileged to run. Thank you. Thank you. You make me look so much cleverer than I really am. I'm looking at you, Stuart, obviously. The other thing is you can't stop engaging with this. This is our digital economy as a country. It's not theirs. It's not run by them. It's run and contributed by us. What has differentiated Australia, in my view, and based on my work with other countries, is how we have such engagement at a grassroots level. Please keep engaging, and then that will be something that we will rightly be proud of, not only because of its inclusion, but also because of the way it connects right across our economy. So thank you, don't stop.
Brilliant. And what Scott was going to also add is that he's got a table set up next to the coffee cart where you can get an autographed copy of any of his reports, if you so choose. But ladies and gentlemen, give it up for our wonderful panel. Amanda, Jill, Scott, thank you very much.
Thank you to Stu.